courtroom smelled like old wood and floor wax. I noticed that the second I walked through the door. That particular smell, the kind that doesn't change no matter what year it is. I'd been in worse places, sand and diesel and burning rubber. But nothing quite prepared me for the feeling of walking into that room and seeing my ex-husband's face split into a slow, satisfied smile the moment he spotted me. He leaned over to his attorney and said something. They both laughed. Quiet, like they were trying to be polite about it. I kept walking. My daughter was not in that room. She was 8 years old and sitting in my sister's kitchen 12 miles away, probably eating cereal and watching cartoons, not knowing that two people who were supposed to love her were about to fight over her like she was a piece of furniture in a divorce sale. I had thought about that all morning. I had thought about her face, the way she always scrunched up her nose when she was worried about something, the way she still reached for my hand in parking lots, even though she was old enough to know better. I sat down at the table on the left. Alone. No attorney. Just me, my service record, and the manila folder I had organized myself on the floor of my sister's spare bedroom the night before. My ex-husband, I'll call him my ex-husband because that is what he is, and giving him any more of my words feels like a waste, sat at the table on the right with a $400 an hour attorney named something I didn't bother to memorize. His mother, his father, and his older brother who had driven up from Houston specifically for this. 4 people, a whole audience. I had been home for 11 days. I want to tell you something about Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Before I tell you the rest of this, I want to tell you about the morning I got the papers. It was early. Before 5, before the heat settled in, and I was lacing up my boots outside the barracks when my sergeant found me and handed me an envelope. He didn't say anything. He knew what it was because I had told him the week before that my ex-husband had threatened to file. I had thought it was a threat. I had thought we would talk when I got home, figure things out like adults, do it quietly for Marisol's sake. The envelope said summons. Family Court, Tarrant County, Texas, across the top. I sat down on the step and I read it right there. My ex-husband was petitioning for sole custody of our daughter on the grounds that I was an absent and emotionally unavailable parent whose military career made it impossible to provide a stable home environment. He had filed while I was deployed. He had waited until I was 6,000 miles away and then he filed. I folded the papers back into the envelope and I put them in my left breast pocket, right next to where I kept the photo of Marisol that she had drawn herself. A crayon picture of me in uniform with the words, "My mom the soldier," across the top in crooked letters. I finished lacing my boots. I went to morning formation. I did my job. But I want you to know that I cried that night. I want you to know that because I think sometimes people hear she's military and they picture someone who doesn't feel things the way regular people do. I felt everything. I just learned a long time ago where to put it. My name is Ivy Carver. I am 31 years old. I was a military police officer, 31B, United States Army for 8 years. 2 deployments, one to Afghanistan, one to Iraq. I came home both times. I know that's not nothing. I grew up in Abilene, Texas. My grandmother raised me, not my parents, my grandmother. My mother left when I was 4. My father was around sometimes and then he wasn't, and by the time I was 10, I'd stopped counting on him to be anything consistent. My grandmother, Dorothy Carver, was the one who showed up. She was at every school play I was ever in, every graduation, every hard conversation I didn't know how to start. She was the one who drove me to the recruiter's office when I was 19 and said if this is what you want, then I'm proud of you. She meant it. You could always tell when Dorothy meant something. She passed away 18 months ago while I was on my second deployment. She left me her house, a 3-bedroom on Mockingbird Lane in Abilene that she had paid off herself over 30 years of working as a bookkeeper for a heating and air company. She left it to me in a will she had updated 6 months before she died, very specifically with a notary present because she knew my father would contest it if she didn't make it airtight. She was right. He tried anyway. But that's a different story, and it's already been handled. What matters right now is that I had a house, I had a home, I had a place for Marisol that was ours, that no one could take, that smelled like my grandmother's coffee, and had a backyard with a pecan tree that Marisol liked to climb. What I did not have when I got those papers was an attorney. Judge Advocate General handles military legal matters, criminal, administrative, things that fall under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. They are not set up to litigate civilian family court cases in Texas. I asked. I asked twice to be sure. The answer was the same both times. This is outside our scope, Specialist Carver. I looked into civilian attorneys. The retainer quotes I got were between $3,000 and $7,500 upfront. I was making $28,000 a year. I had $4,100 in my savings account, $12,200 of which was already earmarked for the security deposit on an apartment closer to Marisol's school when I got back. I had sent money home every month while I was deployed to my sister for Marisol's expenses because my ex-husband had told me 2 months in that he was stretched thin and could use the help. I had believed him. I had sent $400 a month for 4 months before I realized he had just started a lease on a new truck. I filed the paperwork myself. I read the Texas Family Code. I watched every YouTube video I could find. I called the Tarrant County Family Court self-help line 4 times and took notes in a spiral notebook I bought at the PX for $189. The morning of the hearing, I put on my Army combat uniform. Not because I was trying to make a statement, because it was the right thing to wear, because I had earned it, because when someone is trying to tell a judge that you are unstable and unreliable and absent, it helps to walk in as exactly what you are, a soldier with 8 years of service, 2 combat deployments, and a conduct record without a single disciplinary action. I drove myself to the courthouse. I parked in the public garage. I paid the $8 for parking. I went inside. My ex-husband's name is not something I'm going to give you. He gets enough of the air in this story just by being in it. We met when I was 22. He was charming then, or at least I thought so. He was good-looking in a certain way, good at first impressions, and very certain about everything, which I found reassuring at the time because I was used to uncertainty. We got married when I was 23. Marisol was born when I was 24. By the time I was 26, I had figured out that the certainty wasn't confidence. It was just rigidity. He thought he was always right because he couldn't imagine that he wasn't. He didn't like the army. He had known I was enlisted when we met, had said all the right things about respecting my service, and then had spent the next 5 years making me feel guilty for every training exercise, every duty weekend, every deployment. When I got the orders for my first deployment, he said, "I can't believe you're choosing this over your family." When I came home, he said, "You've changed." When I got the second deployment orders, he just went quiet, the kind of quiet that's louder than yelling. We separated 8 months before I deployed the second time. It was mutual in the sense that we both said the word okay when I suggested it. It was not mutual in any other sense. He wanted me to resign my commission and get a civilian job and be home for dinner every night. I wanted him to understand that what I did mattered, that it wasn't just a job I could fold up and put in a drawer, that I was good at it and it was part of who I was. Neither of us could give the other what they wanted. So we said okay. We had a verbal agreement about Marisol. She would stay with him during the deployment. His schedule was more flexible. He worked from home. It made logistical sense. My sister would be nearby for backup. He would bring Marisol to my grandmother's house on weekends so she could stay connected to that part of her life. I would video call every chance I got. He brought her twice in 8 months. He told me when I asked that the drive was hard on her. Abilene to Fort Worth is 2 hours and 40 minutes. The judge's name was Honorable Warren T. Hutchins. I know because I had researched him beforehand. He had been on the bench for 14 years. Before that, he had served in the Army Reserve. I found that in a Bar Association profile from 2009. It did not change how I presented my case. But I noted it. He came in and everyone stood and then sat, and he looked over the room the way judges do, taking inventory, figuring out what he's dealing with before anyone said a word. My ex-husband's attorney stood up first and introduced his client and the family members present. He said they were there in support. He said the word stability 4 times in his opening statement. He said my daughter deserved a parent who could be present consistently day after day. He gestured toward me once, not impolitely, just enough to let the implication land. Then it was my turn. I stood up. I stated my name and my rank and my unit. I said I was representing myself. I said I had prepared a brief for the court's consideration and I slid it across to the clerk. My ex-husband's attorney objected on some procedural ground. The judge looked at the brief, looked at me, and said, "Overruled." Continues Specialist Carver. What happened next is the part I've thought about the most since. Not because it was dramatic, though it was, a little, but because of what it meant. I had prepared 4 main arguments. First, Marisol's primary attachment to me, documented through school records, pediatric visit notes, and a letter from her second-grade teacher. Second, my housing situation. The paid-off home in Abilene, stable, hers, already set up with her own room. Third, my employment. I had a firm job offer from the Abilene Police Department starting the month after my discharge, background already cleared. Fourth, the history of my ex-husband's stated commitments versus his actual behavior, the missed weekends, the unreturned calls, the 4 months of financial support requests. I was halfway through my second point when the judge stopped me. "Specialist Carver," he said, "is that a combat action badge?" I looked down at my chest. "Yes, sir." He was quiet for a moment, not the thoughtful kind of quiet. The kind that means something has shifted. "And the Army Commendation Medal with V device?" "Yes, sir." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at my ex-husband's table. Then he looked back at his papers. "Continue," he said. I continued. When I was finished, my ex-husband's attorney cross-examined me. He asked about deployment length. He asked about communication gaps. He asked, and I want to note that he did ask this out loud in a court of record, whether I had considered whether my career choices were compatible with motherhood. I said, "With respect, counselor, I'd ask you to rephrase that question in a way you'd be comfortable asking a father." The judge said, sustained, "Move on." My ex-husband testified. He said he loved Marisol. I believe that is true. He said he had been her primary caregiver for the past 8 months. That is also true, at least in terms of physical presence. He said I had been largely unavailable. His attorney produced phone records showing that I had called fewer than 20 times in 8 months. What the phone records did not show, because my attorney would have known to ask for them and I did not, was that 14 of those calls had gone unanswered. I didn't have the documentation to counter it in the moment. I had a note in my spiral notebook that said phone log. Didn't save these. Should have saved these. It was one of the things I did wrong. I am telling you this because I think it matters. I wasn't perfect in that room. I made mistakes. I went in underprepared in certain ways and I knew it. But I kept going. Closing arguments. My ex-husband's attorney spoke for 11 minutes. He talked about stability. He talked about Marisol's adjustment. He said very smoothly that no one was disputing Specialist Carver's service. It was admirable, truly. But that Marisol needed a parent, not a soldier. I had 30 seconds of something very cold move through me when he said that. Then it passed. I stood up. I said, "Your Honor, I have served this country for 8 years. I have done 2 combat deployments. I have never received a disciplinary action. I have a home that my grandmother left to me, paid off in the school district where I want to raise my daughter. I have a job offer that starts in 30 days. I have a daughter who calls me every night before bed on the nights her father answers. I am asking this court to look at what I have built, not at how many miles I was away while I was building it." I sat down. The room was quiet for a moment. Judge Hutchins looked at his papers. Then he looked at me. Then he said, "I'm going to take a brief recess." 17 minutes. That's how long the recess was. I know because I counted. I sat at my table and I did not look at my ex-husband. I looked at the window. There was a pigeon on the outside ledge, just sitting there, completely unconcerned with any of this. I thought about Marisol eating cereal. I thought about the pecan tree in the backyard. I thought about my grandmother sitting at her kitchen table in the mornings, hands around her coffee mug, not saying anything, just present. When Judge Hutchins came back, he did not sit down immediately. He stood at the bench and he looked at both tables. "I've reviewed the evidence submitted and heard both parties," he said. "I want to address something directly before I issue my ruling." He looked at my ex-husband's table. "Military service is not evidence of parental absence. Deployment is not abandonment. This court will not penalize a parent for serving their country." He paused. The petitioner's argument rests significantly on the premise that physical distance equals emotional distance. The evidence does not support that conclusion. Then he looked at me. Specialist Carver, your service record is exemplary. Your housing situation is stable. Your employment prospects are concrete. Your daughter's attachment to you is well documented. The court finds no credible evidence that primary custody with you would be contrary to Marisol's best interests. He sat down. Primary physical custody is awarded to the mother. The father will have scheduled visitation on alternating weekends and agreed holidays. Child support to be calculated per Texas Family Code guidelines and ordered accordingly. He signed something. He said, "Court is adjourned." I didn't cry until I got to my car. I sat in the driver's seat in the public garage, still in my uniform, and I let it happen. 8 months of deployment, the papers, the spiral notebook, the nights I watched illegal videos on my phone in a barracks bunk, Marisol's crayon drawings still in my breast pocket. All of it. I cried for maybe 4 minutes. Then I blew my nose on a McDonald's napkin I found in the car folder and I called my sister. She answered on the first ring. "Well," she said. "We won," I said. I heard her make a sound I can't really describe. And then in the background, because she had her on speaker, or maybe Marisol was just that close, I heard my daughter say, "Mom," in the way she says it when she's not sure what's happening but she knows it matters. "Hey, baby," I said. "Did you win?" she said. I laughed. I actually laughed. "Yeah," I said. "We won. Can we get Whataburger?" We can get Whataburger. There's something I've thought about a lot since that day. My ex-husband's attorney said I was a soldier, not a parent. He said it like those were two different things. Like you had to choose. Like the part of me that ran toward hot things was separate from the part that loved my daughter. But it's the same part. It has always been the same part. The reason I enlisted at 19, when I could have done a dozen other things, was because I wanted to be someone Marisol could be proud of. She wasn't born yet. I didn't know she was coming, but I wanted to be the kind of person who shows up, who does the hard thing, who keeps going when it would be easier to stop. She knows that now. She's 8, and she knows it in the way kids know things, not in words, but in something deeper. She knows her mother came home. She knows her mother showed up to that courthouse alone and stood up and said, "This is who I am," and didn't apologize for any of it. My grandmother would have liked that, I think. She would have had something quiet and true to say about it. She would have had her hands around her coffee mug. I think about her every morning when I make coffee in her kitchen. Our kitchen. Mine and Marisol's. The pecan tree is still in the backyard. Marisol still climbs it. Some things hold. I've thought a lot about what my ex-husband's attorney said, that I was a soldier, not a parent, that those two things couldn't coexist, and I think what bothers me most about it, still, even now, isn't that he said it. It's that for a long time, I half believed it myself, not consciously, but in the way you absorb things people repeat to you. My ex said versions of it for years, that I was choosing the army over my family, that I was never really present even when I was home. You hear something enough times from someone close to you and it starts to feel like fact, even when it isn't. That's not weakness. That's just how people work. What I know now is this. The choices I made weren't evidence of absence. They were evidence of what I thought a life worth living looked like. I wanted Marisol to grow up knowing her mother didn't quit when things got hard. I wanted her to understand, in whatever way an 8-year-old understands things, that showing up matters, not just for the easy moments, but for the ones that cost you something. My grandmother Dorothy knew that. She raised me on it without ever calling it a philosophy. She just did it, every single day, for 14 years, without anyone handing her a medal or telling her she was brave. She worked her bookkeeping job and she paid off her house and she showed up to every school play and she never made me feel like a burden, not once. The house she left me was not just property. It was the material record of a life lived with intention. Every payment she made on that mortgage was a choice to build something solid, something that would still be standing when she was gone. I think about cause and effect a lot. Not in any mystical way. Just the plain mechanical truth that what you do accumulates. My ex-husband spent years building a case against me out of the wrong evidence. He pointed at the distance and called it abandonment. He pointed at the deployment and called it a choice against our daughter. What he missed, what his attorney missed, was everything that the distance was in service of. The conduct record, the commendations, the discipline I brought home and applied to a spiral notebook and 4 phone calls to a courthouse helpline and a brief I wrote myself on the floor of my sister's spare bedroom. Judge Hutchins saw it, not because I told him to, because it was there, documented, pinned to my chest, and filed in a manila folder. You cannot argue with a record. You can try to reframe it the way a good attorney will, but the record itself doesn't move. That's the thing about integrity. It's not dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It just accumulates quietly, the way my grandmother made her mortgage payments, until one day someone looks at the sum of it and there's nothing left to dispute. Marisol climbs the pecan tree in the backyard most afternoons now. I watch her from the kitchen window while I make coffee, and I think about what I want her to learn from all of this. Not that the system works perfectly. It doesn't. Not that doing the right thing always wins. It doesn't. Not always, not automatically, but that the work you put into being someone is never wasted, that the version of yourself you build in the hard years is the one that shows up when it matters most. She asked me once, a few months after the hearing, why I wore my uniform to court. I told her because it was the truest thing I had to wear. She thought about that for a second, the way she does, scrunching her nose. Then she said, "Okay," and went back to her cereal. That was enough.